Welcome back to Economic Outlook. Today I want to conclude my series on energy usage in the developing world by examining potential trends as developing markets become more advanced. The per capita analysis of energy consumption gave several useful insights as to the direction energy usage may take as emerging markets become more advanced. The first major trend is that industrial energy consumption will be much more intensive as developing economies become more advanced. By definition, more developed economies employ automation and technology in the place of human labor for industrial manufacturing. And right now, the developing world, and especially China, relies upon labor-intensive manufacturing for its industrial output. Eventually, these economies will begin to make a slow transition away from a singular focus on exports. Currency appreciation will make imports more affordable and bolster domestic consumer spending. As this process takes hold, the economies of developing nations will begin to more closely resemble those of today's developed markets. The proportion of energy consumption for industry will decline. However, the actual amount of energy spent in the sector will stay the same or even increase if the country adopts more advanced production techniques, which are more energy intensive. This means that the developing world will increasingly rely on fossil fuels like coal and other sources of electricity to power their industrial infrastructure. Additionally, the production of automobiles, computers, and electronics often requires increased amounts of petroleum. An important side effect of economic modernization is a shift in production. Today's labor-intensive manufacturing capacity will still be present, but in a different country or region. Wherever this manufacturing occurs, maybe it's in Africa, maybe it's somewhere else, energy consumption will grow in proportion to the demand for the goods produced. This creates a net shift in energy usage, not a decline. Aggregate global consumption will continue to increase as today's emerging markets modernize and use energy-intensive processes, and more labor-intensive activity grows elsewhere. This is a critical point because global energy demand will not go down. It's a fundamental aspect of economic growth. When production shifts to a new area, energy consumption will begin there as well, and we'll see the same trends in those emerging markets as we see in today's developing economies. A second major trend is that consumer spending will increase commercial and residential energy consumption. When modernization increases per capita energy consumption in the industrial sector, it will alter the behavior of the people living in developed states. Greater prosperity will allow people to make discretionary purchases. The commercial sector will grow relative and gross energy consumption. Residential consumption will increase as well. Consumers will be able to afford better housing with more amenities like air conditioning. Consumer electronics will become more widely available. All this increasing prosperity will inevitably increase gross energy consumption for household. However, gains in other areas may limit the relative increases of energy consumption for developed nations. My third and final observation is that transportation is the most important source for increased consumer demand as emerging markets become more advanced. Transportation is one of the most important considerations for emerging economies. It represents the most energy-intensive activity of developed economies on a per capita basis. It is also the sector most dependent on petroleum as a source of fuel for automobiles. And fortunately, it's also the sector within which effective public policy can play the greatest role in reducing consumption. The magnitude of the potential for growth in the transportation sector is clear. The developing world currently spends 1/12 of the developed world's energy use per capita for transportation. The developing world will lower this ratio as it spends more to move its goods to domestic consumers. Additionally, greater affluence will bring about greater demand for mobility among consumers. The demand for mobility will require investments in infrastructure. This is where governments have the most ability to begin to shape future energy consumption today. The emerging world needs to learn from the mistakes made in the United States and invest in an infrastructure that promotes public transportation and lessens the importance of the personal automobile. This will help reduce dependence on petroleum, although energy needs will manifest in other areas, like electric power or natural gas. Many of Asia's most important developing economies, including China, are taking proactive steps to promote public transportation and support environmental initiatives. However, their efforts must be accompanied by an increased commitment from the developed world to lessen its own emissions and reduce dependence on hydrocarbon resources. In conclusion, the development of emerging markets into advanced economies promises to increase the demand for energy on both a relative and a per capita basis. It is critical for emerging markets to begin building the types of infrastructure today that will help them meet their energy needs in the future. Ultimately, global economic expansion depends upon a stable supply of energy in a variety of forms. Prosperity necessarily entails more high-density energy consumption. We can also expect today's emerging markets to follow development patterns similar to those in nations that are already developed, like the United States or the European Union. Therefore, securing stable supplies of energy is important to economic growth and social stability, both in the developing world and in today's advanced markets. It is the responsibility of both the developed and developing world to begin to analyze future energy use and make better decisions on infrastructure today to prevent consumption habits from becoming too inherent in future economic expansion. Developed nations like the United States need to commit to more sustainable practices and find common ground with the emerging world on issues like the environment or emissions. Without effective policy leadership from both sides, future demand for energy will create conflict, inhibit economic growth, and threaten the environment. I hope that you've enjoyed my look at energy consumption in the emerging markets of the world and how these consumption patterns may change over time. Hopefully you found the discussion informative and can help you make better policy decisions as you engage in global business. Thank you as always for joining me here at Economic Outlook, and be sure to check out my website for more information at www.econoutlook.com. Thanks, and I'll see you next week with a new book review as well as a new entry.